It started like any other Tuesday afternoon in the sleepy town of Waverly, Ohio. A stretch of rural quiet, dotted with old barns, sagging porches, and winding back roads that most people drove through without a second glance. Nothing much ever happened here. The local diner closed at 4, the post office shut by lunch, and if you heard sirens, it usually meant someone's cow had wandered onto the highway again. But on this particular afternoon, as the summer heat shimmered above the blacktop and kids chased sprinklers in their front yards, something strange broke the stillness. It was just after 2:15 p.m. when Officer Daniel Rhodes rolled down Main Street in his cruiser. His partner, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois named Rocco, sat alert in the back seat. Rhodes was mid-sip from a lukewarm coffee when Rocco's ears pricked up. Then he started whining, not barking yet but making that sharp, anxious noise only handlers understand. Something was off. Rhodes glanced into the rearview mirror. Rocco was pacing, nose pressed against the window. "What's got into you, buddy?" Rhodes muttered, pulling the car to the curb. Ahead of them was an old-fashioned ice cream truck, idling in front of a small playground, the kind painted in pastel colors, with cartoon decals peeling at the corners. A soft jingle played on repeat, its melody oddly out of tune, like it had been warped over time. Kids were nearby, but none were approaching the truck. They were hanging back to watching. One mother had a hand on her child's shoulder, visibly tense. That was the first sign something wasn't right. Rocco barked, one sharp, warning bark that echoed through the cruiser like a gunshot. Rhodes had been on the force for 11 years. He knew Rocco's alerts. This wasn't curiosity. This was a trained response. Drugs, maybe weapons, something dangerous. He radioed it in as a welfare check. Nothing major yet. Hand stepped out into the thick summer air. The ice cream truck didn't move. No one leaned out of the window to wave. No cheerful call of who wants a treat. Just that eerie jingle, playing on loop, growing more sinister the longer it ran. As Rhodes approached, hand resting on his holster, Rocco began barking in earnest. Deep, rapid barks, controlled but intense. He wanted out. Bad. Rhodes could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Sir, Waverly Police," he called out, keeping his voice firm but calm. "You need you to step out of the vehicle." No answer. The driver's window was tinted dark too dark for a vehicle like that. The side window where kids would normally order was closed, latched tight from the inside. That's when Rhodes noticed the license plate, or rather, the lack of one. And that's when everything started to feel very wrong. He took a step closer, just as the engine sputtered and the jingle finally cut off mid-tune. A moment of silence, then the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out slowly. He looked ordinary, maybe late 50s, gray beard, baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look threatening, but his hands were shaking. "You all right there, sir?" Rhodes asked, trying to assess. The man didn't speak. He looked past Rhodes, right at the police cruiser, and locked eyes with Rocco. The barking had stopped. Rocco was frozen now, intensely focused, eyes locked on the man, his whole body tense like a coil. Rhodes reached for his radio. Something was off. The man suddenly turned, made a move back toward the truck, and that was all Rocco needed. The door of the cruiser burst open, and in a blur of fur and muscle, Rocco was out. Rhodes barely had time to react as his canine partner shot forward, intercepting the man before he could reach the back of the truck. The man didn't fight. He collapsed to the ground, covering his head, muttering something under his breath. Rhodes cuffed him quickly, calling for backup. The man kept repeating the same phrase over and over. I didn't want to. By now, other units were arriving. An ambulance pulled up, then detectives, then a crowd of neighbors who had been drawn by the sirens. Someone tried to open the back of the ice cream truck, but it was locked tight, padlocked. They had to use bolt cutters. What they found inside would never leave them. No one expected it, not in Waverly, not in a place like this. Inside the truck wasn't ice cream. There were no freezers, no popsicles, no sprinkles. There were cages. 4 of them, and only 3 were occupied. Small children, barely 5, maybe 6 years old, huddled in the corners, terrified, dehydrated and drugged. The 4th cage, it was open. Empty, and the whole town would soon realize. They were already too late for one of them. The sound of bolt cutters snapping the locks still echoed in Officer Rhodes's mind as he stood frozen outside the truck. The moment they pulled those rear doors open, the stench hit them: stale air, fear, and something else. Something unnatural. He would never forget the silence. That heavy, unnatural kind. Not a single child cried out when they were found. Just blank stares, sunken cheeks, and trembling limbs. Whatever had happened inside that truck, whatever they'd seen or heard, had stolen something from them. Something children should never lose. And then there was the 4th cage. Empty. That detail settled like a stone in Rhodes's gut. The 3 kids had numbers written on their wrists in faded marker: 2, 3, and 4, which meant there had been a 1, and now there wasn't. Detectives swarmed the scene. Forensics, Child Protective Services. Journalists would be here soon, and the nation would demand answers. But in this moment, All Rhodes could see were the hollow eyes of those kids and the slow, rhythmic thud of his own heart beating against his chest. He found himself crouching beside the smallest one, number 4, a girl with tangled red hair and a bruised lip. She flinched at his presence, instinctively curling away. Rocco approached quietly, sitting a few feet away, his ears forward but his posture soft. The girl looked at him, really looked, for the first time, and then she reached out, not for Rhodes, for Rocco. She placed her tiny, trembling hand on the side of his face, and the dog leaned in, pressing gently against her fingers. That's when the tears came, not loud, not messy, just slow, silent streams down her dirt-streaked cheeks. It was like Rocco had unlocked something she'd kept hidden deep inside. Rhodes turned away to hide his own tears. The man they'd arrested, so-called ice cream man, sat handcuffed in the back of a squad car. He hadn't asked for a lawyer, hadn't made a run for it, had barely even spoken since his arrest, other than his repeated, whispered phrase, "I didn't want to." Detective Maria Sanchez had flown in from Columbus after hearing the preliminary report. She was blunt, efficient, and clearly shaken. Rhodes had worked with her before on a few trafficking cases, and he could tell this one was already hitting a deeper nerve. They questioned the man for hours. His name was Leonard Epps, a janitor, on paper. No previous criminal record, lived alone, no family to speak of. He had been driving the truck for just under a year, but the truck wasn't registered to him. Nor was there any record of a legitimate business under the name painted on the side. Happy Licks Ice Cream. The trail of fake names and false addresses stretched across 3 states. When Sanchez came out of the interrogation room that evening, her face was pale. "He's not the one running this," she said quietly. "He's just ... part of it. And the worst part is, I think he really didn't want to." Apparently, Leonard had been coerced, blackmailed, threatened. He wasn't a good man, no one driving that truck could be, but he wasn't the mastermind. He claimed the children were picked up by others, dropped at predetermined spots, rotated between vehicles, hidden in plain sight, used and moved again. The truck was just one of many. But none of that mattered more than the child who was missing, the one who had been in the empty cage. Her name, they discovered, was Molly. She had been taken from a rest stop along I-77 2 weeks prior. Her parents had left the car running for just 3 minutes while grabbing food from a vending machine. She had been in the back seat, strapped in, watching cartoons on a tablet. 3 minutes. Gone. The case had barely made local news. An Amber Alert had gone out, then faded into the background like so many others. But now, they had a real lead. She had been alive, and in that truck, until recently. The question was, where was she now? As night fell on Waverly, a storm rolled in, the kind that announces itself with low rumbles and sharp wind, tearing through the stillness like a warning. Officers canvassed the area, searching abandoned lots, nearby woods, rest stops along the highways. Rocco worked tirelessly, sniffing for clues, following cold trails that ended in disappointment. Rhodes didn't sleep, neither did Sanchez, neither did the families who were now arriving from across state lines to collect their children, unsure if they should be grateful or devastated. One mother collapsed on the station floor when she saw her son, just dropped to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The boy didn't run to her, he just stood there, unsure, distant, like he had to remember how to feel safe again. Rhodes had seen a lot in his years on the force, but he wasn't prepared for that kind of heartbreak, the slow kind, the kind that seeps into the bones. He sat outside with Rocco at dawn, the rain having passed, the air heavy and wet. The town was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. He scratched behind Rocco's ears. "Where is she, boy?" he whispered. "Where's Molly?" Rocco simply stared into the distance. And then just after sunrise, dispatch called in with a report. An old truck matching the description of Happy Licks Ice Cream had been seen 1 week ago, parked overnight in a gravel lot just outside an abandoned farmhouse, 30 miles from where they'd made the arrest. The same farmhouse where, according to a local, they'd once heard a child's cry echo through the trees. Before the sound abruptly stopped, Rhodes stood up, so did Rocco. They were going to the farmhouse. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Rhodes steered off the road, his headlights sweeping across the overgrown weeds that had swallowed the path to the farmhouse. The structure itself loomed ahead, gray and weather-beaten, with slanted shutters clinging to rusted hinges and vines creeping up the walls like fingers. It looked forgotten, just another piece of the past left to rot in the middle of nowhere. But Rhodes had learned not to trust appearances, especially now. Rocco sat in the passenger seat, unusually still. His ears twitched as the wind shifted. Something was here. Rhodes could feel it too, that low hum of tension in his spine, the way silence stretched just a little too long. Even the birds had gone quiet. He stepped out carefully, hand resting on his holster but not drawing. This wasn't about force. It was about listening, feeling, trusting instincts, sharpened over a lifetime of walking into places most people never dared. The boards on the front porch groaned under his boots. The door wasn't locked. It hung slightly ajar, as if someone had meant to come back but hadn't. He pushed it open slowly. The smell hit first. damp wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic underneath. The interior was dark, lit only by streaks of morning light cutting through holes in the roof. Dust hung in the air, and every step stirred the past faint footprints. Scraps of torn fabric, the forgotten fragments of lives that had passed through. Rocco followed behind, nose low to the ground, body taut. His breathing shifted nostrils, flaring. Then he stopped at a cracked door that led down into the cellar. He bucked. Quiet, urgent. Rhodes's hand gripped the flashlight tight. He flicked it on and shone it down the stairs. The beam caught on concrete, then on wood, then on something else. A mattress, small, stained, pressed up against a wall. A doll's leg, peeking out from underneath. On the far end of the room, a row of bolts lined the top of a door barely visible in the concrete wall. Like someone had built a second room within the basement itself. It was too quiet, too deliberate. Rhodes radioed in their location, voice low and steady, then descended one step at a time, every board creaking beneath him. Rocco stayed close, head low, breath silent. At the base of the stairs, the air turned colder. He approached the bolted door, heart pounding. His fingers moved on instinct, undoing each latch one by one. When he pulled the door open, it groaned, like it hadn't moved in days. What he saw inside made him stop breathing. It was a room barely 6 feet across. The walls were covered in old soundproofing foam, the kind you might find in a cheap music studio. There were drawings on the wall, crude, shaky crayon lines of stick figures, trees, a sun, and in the corner, there she was, Marlee, curled into herself, wearing the same clothes she'd disappeared in, now threadbare and clinging to her like gauze. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her eyes red and wide, but empty, like the light had been drained out long ago. Rhodes didn't move, not yet. He knew not to rush. Instead, he slowly knelt, keeping his flashlight low, letting her adjust to his presence. Rocco padded forward, quiet as breath. Marlee blinked at the dog. Recognition flickered in her eyes. Something stirred. A single whisper escaped her lips. Rocco. The dog crawled forward and laid his head gently in her lap. That was the moment she broke. She didn't cry like the others. Not loudly. It came out in tiny hiccuped sobs, like the body trying to remember how to release pain. Rhodes felt a knot in his throat. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a protein bar, unwrapped it slowly, and placed it beside her. She took it with trembling fingers. The rescue team arrived 10 minutes later, but it felt like hours. The medics moved gently. No questions, just blankets, warmth, and whispers that she was safe now. That it was over. But Rhodes knew better. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Marlee had been kept alive for what purpose, they still didn't fully know. But she had survived. Somehow, she'd held on. In that dark, cold room, she'd clung to life with a strength no one could teach. A strength he couldn't explain. Later that afternoon, while they sat with her at the hospital, a nurse gently took her hand and asked if there was anything she needed. Marlee looked up at Rhodes. "I want to go home," she said softly. Rhodes nodded. "You will." And he meant it. Even if it took every breath he had, she would go home. But back at the station, Detective Sanchez was reviewing more files, connecting names, tracing phone records, examining camera footage. What they had uncovered in Waverly was just one thread, in a much larger, far more disturbing tapestry. There were more trucks, more children, and someone somewhere was pulling the strings. The farmhouse had been a stop along the way, a temporary holding ground, but the operation itself, it was still out there, still running. And Rhodes, standing in that hospital hallway with Rocco beside him and the weight of the day settling over his shoulders, knew what had to come next. I had to go deeper. 3 days had passed since they found Marlee. 3 days, and Rhodes still hadn't slept more than a handful of hours. He stayed at the station most nights, reviewing reports, combing through call logs, retracing the route of the ice cream truck again and again on a war map cluttered with red pins. The farmhouse had been a critical breakthrough, but it also confirmed the worst fear. The operation was bigger than they thought. Rocco lay under the desk, occasionally glancing up at his partner, as if he could sense the weight pressing on Rhodes's shoulders. He had been more than a dog this past week. He'd been an anchor, the only constant in the chaos. Every time Rhodes found himself slipping into anger or despair, Rocco was there, grounding him. Marlee remained at Waverly Children's Hospital under a protective watch. She hadn't said much, but she didn't need to. Her presence, her quiet, breathing presence was enough to ignite something in everyone who met her. Doctors, nurses, officers, they all carried her story in their eyes now. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a mission. Sanchez had returned from Columbus that morning with a stack of files that looked like they'd been dredged from the bottom of a locked drawer. Hidden arrests, unprosecuted cases, mismatched fingerprints. She laid them out on the table like puzzle pieces. "I think I found our supplier," she said. The name she gave wasn't familiar to Rhodes. No big kingpin. No cartel leader. Just a man named Ellis Granger, a logistics contractor. Worked mostly under the table. Kept to himself. rented warehouses outside of town and paid everything in cash. Connected how? Rhodes asked. Skeptical. Sanchez pointed to a photograph. Granger standing beside a white panel van in front of a supply depot. In the background, barely visible, was the nose of the Happy Licks ice cream truck. Same dent in the bumper, same peeling cartoon sun on the side panel. He's the middleman, she said. Coordinates the transfers, handles the vehicles, picks up and drops off the ones too dangerous to trace. Where is he now? She looked at him grim. We don't know. That afternoon they received a tip from an anonymous call routed through a scrambled line. The voice on the other end trembled. Said they'd seen something, a different truck. Not ice cream this time, an old plumbing service van. Parked for just 20 minutes behind a strip mall on the south side of Dayton. No driver in sight. But the caller swore they heard crying from inside. Then the van sped off. They traced the route, pulling traffic cam footage, and caught one blurry shot of the van turning onto a county road leading toward an old industrial district. That's where Rhodes and Sanchez went next. The area had once thrived with factories and train depots. Now it was a graveyard of steel and rust. Long-forgotten buildings gutted by time, with broken windows and collapsed roofs. The van had last been seen near a warehouse with no active lease, just a shell on paper owned by a shell company in another state. The warehouse was quiet. Too quiet. Even birds didn't nest here. Rocco was the first to signal. His ears perked, tail stiff, muscles locked into focus. He pulled ahead, nose dragging low against the concrete, weaving a line of urgency, straight to a side door partially hidden by a collapsed loading ramp. Rhodes and Sanchez moved in, weapons drawn but steady. They pried the door open. Inside, it was pitch black. Dust filtered through slants in the roof, illuminating only what the light dared to touch. The room was massive. Rows of crates, boxes, discarded pallets, and silence. At first, then a sound. Soft, subtle, a shuffle. Sanchez raised a hand, signaling stillness. Rocco growled, barely audible, but enough. They moved toward the sound slowly, methodically. Behind a stack of pallets, they found them. 2 children, huddled together under a tarp. 1 boy, 1 girl, pale, trembling, eyes swollen and red from crying. The girl couldn't have been older than 8. The boy maybe 6. They didn't speak. They didn't scream. They just held each other, like the only thing that mattered anymore was the warmth of another human body. Rhodes radioed in immediately. EMS backup. The whole unit mobilized within minutes, but it wasn't over. Not yet. As medics rushed to check the children, Sanchez wandered deeper into the warehouse, following Rocco, who hadn't stopped searching. Something still pulled at him. They reached a second room, this one sealed with a steel door. Sanchez used a crowbar to force it open. Inside they found the evidence no one had been ready for by dozens of them, labeled by state. Inside, pages upon pages of names, photos, birthdays, GPS coordinates, meticulously logged details of every child who had passed through the network. Some had check marks, others were crossed out, and many had no ending at all. They had stumbled upon the ledger, the record of a silent war being fought in the shadows. Rhodes stared at the rows of names, each one a life interrupted, each one a cry for help no one had heard until now. He didn't speak. Couldn't he? Just looked down at Rocco, who sat beside him unmoving, staring up with quiet understanding. They were in it now. No turning back. Because the story wasn't just about Marley anymore, it was about all of them. The warehouse was sealed by nightfall, locked behind crime scene tape and guarded by silence. The kind of silence that doesn't settle, but lingers. Rhodes stood in the parking lot, arms crossed, watching the last of the evidence trucks pull away. His shirt stuck to his back, not from heat but from the weight of it all. They had found 27 names in those binders that matched open Amber Alerts. 27 families who had never gotten closure. Most of those names would soon find a path home. Some, tragically, never would, but Marley was already home. Rhodes had gone to see her that morning. No uniform, just jeans and an old hoodie. He didn't know what he expected, maybe that same vacant stare, the deep silence she wore like armor. But she'd changed, not completely, not suddenly, but enough. She was sitting up in bed tracing a crayon across paper. The lines were shaky but purposeful when he walked in. She looked up. This time she smiled, a small one, almost a whisper of a smile. But real. And then she did something he wasn't ready for. She reached out, arms open, and hugged him. There were no words, just that moment. That simple, quiet act of trust, of thanks, of healing. Later she asked about Rocco. So Rhodes brought him in. She lit up when she saw him, the first real light in her eyes since they'd pulled her from that basement. Rocco walked straight to her bedside, laid his head on her legs, and stayed there as if he, too, needed to feel that she was safe. When Rhodes looked at them together, girl and doggy saw something he hadn't felt in days. Hope, not the loud kind, not the kind with banners or headlines, but the kind that endures quietly, steadily, the kind that survives. The arrests came swiftly after. With the warehouse evidence, the task force was able to move on several known players in the trafficking ring. Granger was found 2 states away, holed up in a motel under a different name. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just sat down on the curb and waited. as if he'd known this moment was coming. In the weeks that followed, Rhodes returned to patrol. He said no to press interviews, no to handshakes from officials who hadn't returned his calls to months ago. He wasn't in it for that. Never had been. Sometimes at night, he would sit with Rocco in the cruiser and drive past the old park where it all began. The bench where the ice cream truck had stopped, the place where a bark broke the silence. And every time he remembered how close they had come to missing it. 1 minute slower, one decision delayed, one bark ignored, and Marley might never have come home. It haunted him, but it also grounded him because it reminded him that doing the right thing didn't always look heroic. It didn't come with music or medals. Sometimes it was just a dog barking at the wrong truck. Sometimes it was showing up every day even when it hurt. Sometimes it was a little girl drawing a sun with crayons in a hospital bed trying to remember how light felt. They didn't save everyone. That truth would live in Rhodes forever. But they saved her. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to save others, too. As long as someone kept listening, as long as someone paid attention, and as long as one bark was never ignored.